Hey, everybody.
Hello, hello.
Are back.
We're live and we're talking about our podcast today.
We are. I'm super excited about this.
I know, because we've been doing it for a few months now and I've been telling everyone else about it, but I'm excited to do a video chat about it.
Yes. Yeah. We've been working on it for a few months. It's only been out for a couple weeks, more than a couple weeks. It's been out for a few weeks, but we've been working on it for a while. So we're excited to chat with you about it.
Yeah. We're going to try and contain all the excitement and emotions, maybe not all the emotions, but all the information until we give people some time to show up. But maybe we can give you some idea of some of the things that have popped up on the podcast.
Yes, because it is a podcast based on our magazine, but other things come up from time to time. We've talked about islands of cheeses.
Yes, we have. And frosting on cakes.
Frosting on cakes, yes. We've talked about drug smuggling fishermen.
Yes, we have. That has come up. And city food foraging.
It's not a food podcast, and yet
It does come up a lot, actually. The pain of giving up Nutella has come up.
Yep. Another food theme has come up. We've talked about our desire to hug apex predators.
And the best places to buy parkas.
Yes, that was a good conversation. We've also talked about big topics like our place in the universe.
That has come up. That has definitely come up. We talked about flower power as well. That came up on one. And award-winning travel narratives where the journalists don't actually go anywhere.
Yeah, because pandemic has made that a possibility.
Oh my gosh. Yes.
And a necessity in a lot of cases.
So true.
Yeah. We've also talked about parallel lives.
Yes. And being owned by a falcon.
Yep. How much we love evergreens.
Yes, that has come up. And we spent a lot of time reflecting on what it all means. All of it.
Yeah. What it all means. What does it all mean? Well, So this podcast is a little bit different. We're excited this video is a little bit different. We're excited you're joining us because we're not talking about a story this time. We're actually talking about a project that we've been working on. As always, this is pre-recorded. We are, but not by much. And we're live in the chat if you are watching this as we're broadcasting it. So say hello. If you have questions along the way, feel free to ask them. Sabine and I are both hanging out in there.
Yes, we are. Yes, we are. And for those of you who've been hanging out with us the last minute or two, I've been listing this hodgepodge of things. You're like, what is the podcast actually about? Is there a theme, or do you just talk about all of these fascinating and yet random things? Yes, there is a structure to it.
Yes.
It's about stories and storytellers at the frontiers of courage and curiosity, which is just as cool as it sounds.
Pretty much, yeah. We get to read you stories from our magazine, which all fall into this theme that we've set up for the first season of the podcast, In Pursuit of Phantoms. And after we read the story, we get to interview the authors and have these really fantastic conversations that have been so enjoyable from our end.
Yeah, that has been one of the best things about the last couple of months of work is having the opportunity to have those kind of conversations and interviews and go to these really cool places with people.
Definitely. And catch it back up with writers that we've worked with over the last few years and hear about all the exciting things they've been up to. It's been a real treat for us.
Yeah. And so as Siv mentioned, the podcast has a theme, which is In Pursuit of Phantoms. And so what we did when we were first setting up the podcast is we sat down and looked at every single article we've ever published since we started in 2017. And that process in itself was really cool because I think it was the first time that I ever sat down and fully considered the scope of what we've published so far.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we publish issues and we get focused on the issue. And then we move on to the next thing, and we certainly love these stories and we come back to them, but I hadn't either. I hadn't sat down and looked at the entire body of what Hidden Compass has become, the body of work that Hidden Compass has published. And
Right.
so that's been a lot of fun.
Yeah. I mean, how often do editors and publishers get to do that? Get to just sit down and look at everything?
I mean, and the fact that we're even able to do that
Mhm.
is largely because of our structure, right? And because of the number of stories we publish each year that allows us to hold them all together and not just move on and forget about something we published 4 years ago.
Yeah. And for those people who have randomly wandered onto our page and don't know how many stories we publish a year, we only publish 20.
Yes.
20.
Yeah.
I think of all the publications who they publish 20 stories a day easily. So we get to spend a lot of time with each of those stories, and they get to be reincarnated in new versions like they are in the podcast. So yeah.
Yeah, it's always been a goal for us that, every story we select to publish, we're looking for stories that are kind of timeless, right? That aren't going to lose their meaning in a month or their relevance in a month. But it's great to have been able to see that as we've looked at every story we've published and organized the podcast, to see that these stories have actually not just stood the test of time, but in a lot of cases have taken on new meanings as time has gone on and as the world has moved on. And they connect with, they certainly connected with the themes we publish them under, but they also connect with other themes and other questions.
Yeah, which was fun. I mean, that's what we got to do, is find the stories that fit along the In Pursuit of Phantoms theme for season 1 of the podcast. And every story we publish is published within an issue, and each issue has a theme. And because our stories are so multifaceted, we get to dig around in there and see how they resonate on other levels. And that's been really fun to do. And to appreciate just the diversity of the stories and the voices and the places and the issues that have been covered so far.
Definitely. And it's also just been an honor to be able to narrate these stories and to give them, to send them out to a new audience through the podcast and get, to give them an opportunity to live on in a new format has been a treat and an honor. We're grateful to our contributors who've allowed us to do that. And it's been a lot of fun putting this podcast together.
Yeah. And I'm excited that we got to go back in time to narrate these stories. I mean, we recently had a conversation with Jody Cash, who's the second episode in the season, and her story appeared in the second issue we ever published. And like you were saying, so we aim to have timeless stories, and hers was definitely one of those where you and I both looked at it and said, we would publish this again today.
Yeah. Yeah. And Jody was the second issue we ever published, but the third episode of the podcast, because you were the second episode of the podcast.
How could I forget?
I might not have said anything except that you were, in fact, the second episode.
I know. Well, I went after Haley Nicole, and she was such a hard act to follow. I remember after having that conversation with her, which was, the original conversation was like 2.5 hours.
Right.
The podcast is obviously nowhere near that long. We edited it down, which was a challenge because it was such a good conversation. But I remember after that thinking, oh no, I have to go after her. She did so well.
It was a hard act to follow, but you did just fine. It was
you were interviewing me, so that helps too.
And that was also fun for us. I mean, just as an aside, it's been great to talk to our storytellers, and we've been Hidden Compass storytellers on occasion as well. And so to be able to have those conversations with each other after we've written stories, because we also generally function as each other's editors when we write these stories, but then, we write them, we publish them, we move on to the next thing. So to get to revisit stories with each other that you and I have written has also been kind of a neat experience.
Yeah. And we don't really like to publish ourselves that often. We hold back. And so the pieces we have published of each other are pieces that really mean a lot to each of us, and have roots that go deep. So those conversations were fantastic. I'm so glad we got to have those.
Definitely.
I'm glad to have all of the conversations we've had have been fantastic, actually. So, we talked about how we got to go back in time and pick the stories and then narrate them. And then the second part of this is that we bring each of the storytellers in and sit down in conversation with them. And those have been fantastic.
Yeah. Yeah. There's so much material that's behind the stories, right? We see a polished version of the story, but to be able to dive in and talk to our storytellers about what went into producing the story, both on the ground as they were traveling and trying to get the story and talk to sources and have the experiences that eventually made it into the stories we published, but also the process of writing, the process of editing, the process of sometimes going to places that might be a little bit more difficult, but doing it in service of sort of a greater message in the story has been rewarding to be able to have those conversations.
Yeah. And we at Hidden Compass, we're really selective about the stories that we publish, and we really push our contributors. And so a lot of these are stories that the pieces go really deep with the journalists. They go back sometimes years, occasionally into lifelong threads of, we say fascination. I think at one point in the podcast that changed to obsession. And so there really is a lot underneath the surface of a story. And that's been really cool to bring that to light, because we get to go behind the scenes in a way. Also, if you hear lots of like excited noises in the background, that's my husband and our dog having a moment. Pandemic times continue with the Facebook. But they're sharing in our excitement is what's happening.
Exactly. That's what it is. Well, right. We get to, part of what we have always also wanted to do is to go deeper rather than broader a lot of times, right? We've always been, when we first launched and we published quarterly and we published 20 stories a year, 5 stories per issue, a lot of the feedback we got from other people in the industry, not necessarily our readers, was that no, we had to be publishing more often and we need to publish more content and more stories and more frequently, which we kind of pushed back on. And instead of publishing more, we wanted to publish stories that would resonate and that would mean something and that would really take readers on a journey. And that also meant that often our storytellers went on a journey with us, and we went on a journey with them in the editing process. And getting to hear how just that process has meant something to our contributors has also been interesting, coming out of these podcast interviews and how they've enjoyed that back and forth. And the reality is we publish so few stories that we also get really attached to them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just wanted to jump in and say, like, it's been really reaffirming to me having these conversations. It makes me feel really proud of us for sticking our ground on that and saying we're not going to just publish more and more and more and go broader. We really want to go deeper with each one. And yeah, like you said, the feedback at the beginning is people say, that's not how it's done. And we're like, well,
that's how we're doing it.
We're going to do it this way. But that's, it's going out on a limb a little bit. Because this is the first publication company I've ever founded. I don't know about Stefani. Stefani has hidden pasts sometimes. But yeah, right. But it's been really cool to see just how deep these stories go for the journalists. And it's been a moment for me in this process of, yes, this was definitely the right call.
Definitely. Yeah. And to revisit these stories that we are so attached to, and to be able to, like I said before, to give them a new life in podcast form. And it's been exciting to see how these stories have evolved and how the meanings have evolved. And part of our attachment is also, we're attached not just to these stories, but to the people who tell them. And so when we decided to launch a podcast, going deeper instead of going broader, and inviting the storytellers onto the podcast to be part of these interviews and these conversations was just kind of the natural choice.
Yeah, it was an obvious choice for us, for sure. And it has been so cool to see how they are attached. I mean, obviously we're attached to our stories when we write and report them, and especially if we're going to the ends of the earth to get the story. But I'm thinking in particular of our first conversation on our first episode with Haley, where we were asking her about if there's one piece that she's ever published that she wants people to read, and she's like, actually this one. And that was just a great moment to feel like we could be the publication that publishes stories that feel like the best work for our contributors.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And given, how much effort we ask of them when we work with them and how much we ask of them and how much work they do with these stories, it makes it even more worthwhile when we know that they've produced a story that they are incredibly proud of.
Yeah. And it's another thing I like about the podcast is you get to see how much effort has gone in and thought has gone into these stories, and to hear from the storytellers personally is something you don't always get. And they're beautiful stories. I love listening to them. I love getting to bring them into podcast form. A lot of them have won awards. It's been really cool to introduce each of these stories and talk about all the awards they've been winning, and we get to kind of brag alongside our contributors, which is nice.
Definitely. And when we started out, we've pretty much always asked a lot of our contributors, and I know that when we started out, it was also kind of the fear. We were asking more of our storytellers than most publications ask of their storytellers.
Yeah.
And but I'm really glad that we do. And I think this podcast and the publication is a testament to the effort that they put in.
Yeah. It's kind of like a trial by fire. Like, you work with us, we'll work you hard, but we won't let your stories die.
Right.
They get to live on, and we want you to do your best work.
Right. And we're going to celebrate it, right? Not just the story, but we're going to celebrate all the amazing things that our contributors go on to do. And I'm thinking about Jodi Cash and her current project, which first was on our radar because it was a clip. It was for people who don't know the jargon, right? It was a sample of writing that she sent along with her pitch for the story that ended up in our publication. And it was something that got me excited. I think that got us excited about assigning this story that we did to her. The story she wrote for Hidden Compass is The Beauty and Violence Beneath Our Feet. But this other story was a story about a drug smuggling operation in the 70s in Florida. Mm-hmm. And now that's a project that has turned into a full-length documentary that she's working on. Yeah. Which I'm really excited to see. And so it's great that these relationships have continued and that this community that we've built of storytellers has come back, and that we get to keep celebrating the work that they do.
Yeah. And that you all get to learn more about them, which is so great.
Yes.
You might have noticed that at Hidden Compass, we have shifted the way we talk about who we are, and that we really are focusing on ourselves as a magazine of exploration. The first couple of years, we called ourselves a travel magazine. That never quite fit, because we'd have to say we're a travel magazine, but not that kind of travel magazine.
Right.
And now we're a magazine of exploration. And part of that, of celebrating a new era of discovery and exploration, is to celebrate explorers and storytellers, and to turn them into heroes, or to show them for the heroes that they are. And it doesn't mean that they're perfect, because no human being ever is, but it means that they do really cool stuff that we should all be celebrating. And being able to talk to them on the podcast and talk about some of the cool stuff these people are doing,
right?
It's so affirming and so cool. I'm really excited we're doing this now.
I am too, and I am excited for everyone out there to go and take a listen. You can find us pretty much everywhere that you listen to your podcast: Apple, Spotify, iHeartRadio, you name it. We're listed everywhere. Google Podcasts. We're available all over the place.
Yeah, our episodes come out every Wednesday. If you subscribe on the platforms, it'll just pop up in your feed, as you might know. And you should rate us and review us, because then other people can find us, and it supports what we do. And it also supports all these really cool contributors you get to know through the podcast.
Yes, the rating and reviewing always feels weird for us to ask for this, but it does really help. We have to feed the algorithmic overlords. And so rating and reviewing really does help. And if you could do that, we greatly appreciate it. You will find the links to the podcast in the description of this event, and probably in the comments somewhere along the way as well. Mm-hmm. But also sign up for our newsletter, which we'll include the links there as well. The newsletter is great. If you're not signed up already, it comes out once a month. Katie Narowski, our managing editor, does some great work on the newsletter. It's a fantastic way not just to keep in touch with us, but also to learn about other explorers who are doing amazing things around the world in everything from science to music.
Yes. Yeah. And this is definitely along the deeper, not broader theme where we're not going to spam you or send you bazillion messages. It is, as Siv said, a monthly newsletter that we really think hard about. It's, we muse on big topics, and yeah, you get to meet explorers from around the world, and also get to hear about what books we're reading and what articles we think resonate with some of the articles we've published, because we want to be part of this global conversation. That's the point of being a publication. We're not screaming into the void, we're having a conversation with the world. So the newsletter is a cool place where we get to talk about all those connections too.
Definitely. And if you are new to the podcast, we recommend starting with episode 1, which was People of the Forest, originally written by Haley Nicole, and she's obviously the contributor that we get to chat with during that episode.
Yes, written and photographed by her.
Yes, of course. Can I forget? Yes.
Yeah, and there might have been tears in that first episode. So we started strong.
Yes, we started strong. Written and photographed. That's also, we mentioned that it's won some awards, including it was a notable mention in the Best American Travel Writing, which is, I love it when any of our stories get mentioned in that publication, but I have a particular affinity to our photo features that end up there. Because often we're working, and Haley is an exception to that. Haley is a writer as well as a photographer, but often we're working with photographers who might not be writers. So when those stories get recognized, I love that it shows kind of the editorial process and how that works.
Yeah. Often photographers aren't given the chance to write in-depth stories along with their photography. It's kind of glorified captions.
Yes.
That end up getting published alongside them, but not at Hidden Compass.
Nope.
Because we decided we can't do what everyone else does. We are doing everything differently, which has been fantastic, if challenging sometimes. But we love ambition. We're an ambitious publication. We talk about how much we love ambitious stories, and the podcast really, really highlights the ambitions of our contributors. So check it out if you haven't already. If you have, thank you. You're awesome. And tell everybody, especially once you're vaccinated and back out in the world. It's a great conversation starter.
That's right. What podcasts have you listened to during the pandemic?
Compass, wink, wink. No, we really appreciate your support, and we love all of you, and we're excited to keep doing this. Yeah. So we will see you again next week. Mm-hmm. And until then, check out the podcast, check out the newsletter, and stay safe, get your vaccination.